Good turnout.
We'll give him right in the eye. Make sure you get a cell phone off.
Would everyone stand for pledge of allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you everyone for being here. What we're going to do is I'm going to turn the floor over to Steve here. We're going to let the Board of Aldermen and the Chamber people here have their questions first, and once everybody up here is done with their questions and so forth, we will open it up to everyone out there. And I think if that's agreeable with everybody, that's how we're going to do it. Anyway.
Gary's gonna introduce.
All right.
Sure.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Gary Watts. I'm the plant manager for the Freddie and Packaging plant here in town. I'm also the president of the Chamber of Commerce. One of the things, as the Chamber of Commerce, one of the things we do is we hear from our local businesses, we hear from the community, and and there's always been some concerns as we talk economic development and concerns for our workforce and what we can do for housing, jobs, and other things for our community. One of the things that we looked at, there are several developments that's taking place, both in town but also outside of town. And we want to make sure we have the tools and resources we need to be able to address the future, just as everybody here. So that's part of what we try to do in our roles. We feel very fortunate as we heard of the Port Authority opportunity and being invited by Montgomery County to be included in their request for a Port Authority. So as you will hear from Steve about the Port Authority and how it can be great benefit to us, and from an economic development standpoint, some of the things that it brings to us and assets that it puts at our disposal. The chamber does support this, but again, it's not, Hermann is not just the chamber. It's made up of all of our the people here in town and in our community. So we wanted to just give the opportunity so that we could put this out there and make this more well known. So I will turn this over to Steve Etcher. Steve, thank you for being here tonight, and appreciate all you're going to share with us.
My pleasure. And I know I'm addressing the Board of Aldermen. I'll try to speak loud enough so the entire audience can hear me, and I'll try not to do this so it's hard to follow. But I appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you tonight about what we've got going on the north side of the river, and maybe there's opportunities to partner and collaborate. As Gary said, my name is Steve Etcher. I'm an economic development consultant. I work with communities primarily in rural areas of the state of Missouri. The most proximate clients that we work with would be the Greater Montgomery County Economic Development Council and the Greater Warren County Economic Development Council. So as that business economic development consultant, we really focus those organizations on growing industrial development opportunities within their communities. And we've had some success doing that, but we're never stopping there. We're like, what can we do better? What can we do different? How can we leverage what we have to produce a greater return? So the Montgomery County Economic Development Council has been around for about 40 years. We've been working with them for a little more than 10 years now on a variety of projects. Some that you may be familiar with, some that you may not. Certainty Corporation is one of the projects we worked on. Uncle Ray's Potato Chips, one of the projects we worked on up there. Closer into the city, the American Foods Group project was a project that we worked on behalf of the Warren County Economic Development Council and a number of other projects. But we're always trying to figure out how to do things a little bit different. And about 7 years ago, we had the idea, we had the realization that Missouri is not competing very well against other states for what we would consider large industrial clients, OEMs, automobile manufacturers, or things of that nature. We were getting our lunch handed to us primarily from states in the southeast part of the United States. And as we looked at why are they moving there, there's a lot of reasons, and some can say, well, it's right to work, it's cost of labor, it's cost of land, etc. But I don't believe that is the real push. I think the reason that they're having such success is years ago, decades ago, they positioned themselves to create mega sites, large-scale industrial parks in the southeast, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 acres of land that they've gone in there and have been able to develop to attract some of these very, very large employers to their communities and to their states. So we met with the state leadership back in 2017, 2018, and laid out an argument that if Missouri is going to be truly competitive, domestically and even globally, we need a mega site in the state of Missouri. We don't have one. We've got a lot of really nice communities. We've got a lot of really nice industrial parks. We don't have anything of that magnitude. And of course, we brought together the governor's staff, we brought in the head of DED, we brought in our utility partners, we brought in the railroad, MoDOT, to this meeting to really kind of push them to recognize this is a need for this state. In 2021, the state of Missouri actually hired a consulting company to come into the state and evaluate the opportunities for creating a mega site for industrial development. The work was done under contract with a company called Global Location Strategies. And they toured the entire state of Missouri and looked at those areas that were potentially suitable for a mega site. They have to have large developable lands, they've got to have robust utilities, they've got to make sure the infrastructure is there or can be built there to support that. After that process, and of course we were lobbying heavily for the I-70 Highway 19 intersection and corridor to be the mega site for the state of Missouri. When that study was completed, the recommendation is the preferred, the ideal location for a mega site to serve the needs in the state of Missouri is indeed the Highway 70, Highway 19 intersection corridor. So since that report has come out, we have been advancing the idea of creating a mega site. Been communicating with property owners, we've been working with our utilities, been working closely with the state of Missouri to begin that process. And this is not a snap your fingers and you've got it, but it takes a while to kind of build that up. So we're developing plans to do that even as we speak today. One of the things that we encountered early on, and when I say early on, in 2021, 2022, as we're putting this together, we realized pretty quickly that the ideal site touches multiple political jurisdictions, cities of, county of, and we had to figure out how do we want to really address that to have a really solid development plan. So our mind pivoted to create a new tool that would allow us to use to make the mega site a reality, and that tool is the creation of a port authority. We've talked about one years ago. We thought it was a good idea to help build up commerce on our waterways, but a port authority is more than a port facility. And I want to make people understand that. A port authority is a political subdivision. A port facility is an actual physical asset that you would use to ship and receive commodities that are waterbound. A port authority is this political subdivision that its overall arching is to improve levels of commerce on our waterways. But it does that by leveraging industrial development opportunities or economic development opportunities that would leverage all modes of transportation. And we believe that in Montgomery County, we have a compelling case. We've got mainline railroad with Norfolk Southern, we got Interstate 70, we got Highway 19, which is a good north-south corridor, and on the very southern edge of our county, there's an airport, and there is a small river, known as the Missouri River, you guys are very familiar with it. So we felt like we checked all of the boxes to qualify as a port authority. And so we met with the county commission, laid out our case on why we felt a port authority was a tool that we needed to seriously consider to help us, to enable us to achieve our vast goal on this industrial mega site. That's the backstory, Reader's Digest version of the backstory. Fast forward this year, late 2022, I got a call from our friends at the Hermann Chamber, just wanted to talk about economic development. And I'm a regional guy, by the way. I recognize we have political subdivisions, but I'm a regional thinker. I don't think we have to be constrained by a black line that man has put on a piece of paper and called jurisdictional. I think our economies are regional, our labor force is regional, and the more we can work together regionally, the better off we're going to be. So when I met with the group at the Chamber of Commerce, talking about economic development, I had a quite frank conversation with them in that, unfortunately, the city of Hermann may not be ideally suited for large-scale industrial development. It would wreak havoc, likely, on your tourism industry. Even more complicating is I don't think we can put 10 acres of flat land together in the city. And we're going to need far more than that. So, I look at what Hermann's doing here in their community, not at all in competition of what we're trying to do. It's a completely different market, it's a completely different objective, a completely different end. But following that conversation, I'm driving home and it just kind of dawns on me as like, you know what, we could invite, and by the way, I'm not selling anything tonight. So if you're gonna look at it, when's the big ask, I'm not selling. So I'm really here to just make an invitation to you. So I'm driving home from that meeting going, there would be an incredible value to having the city of Hermann part of our Port Authority process. And I'll explain why I think that in just a little bit. And so since that meeting, we've been trying to educate people, make them aware of the Port Authority so you are aware, so you as the city leaders can make a determination, do we want to align with this or not? And if you do, fantastic. If you don't, fantastic. We're still going to go ahead with our effort in Montgomery County, one way or the other. But to me, it was worth a pause on the Montgomery County side to see if there was opportunities for alignment. Why a Port Authority? And then I'll talk about why Hermann in a minute. A Port Authority is another political subdivision, and nobody wants another layer of government. But I would look at it this way. It is just another tool in the toolbox. It's the extension on your racket that actually makes your socket work, reach its destination. That's all a Port Authority is. It's not trying to complicate things or make things even more challenging. It's a tool to promote economic development. And as a separate entity, as that tool, it has certain powers that are uniquely positioned by state statute for units of government, political subdivisions of the state. They can issue debt through bonds, they can receive grants, they can spend tax dollars, and they can assemble land, which is the tool that we really are looking for our mega site, is that land assemblage tool. Once we get that done, then we're going to be using their financing tool to help build out the infrastructure, receive some grants to do that. But that's what it is. It is merely a tool. So why Hermann? If you're not going to be part of the mega site, why include you? Because I believe your economy is regional. I think you're going to benefit regardless if you're part of this effort or not. You're going to benefit as development occurs at 19 and 70. You're 15 miles away. You're likely going to be a destination for residents. You're likely going to be a destination for commerce activity. You're likely going to be a destination for spin-off companies, professional organizations, or professional firms that would support what's going on at 19 and 70. So you have, I think, quite a bit to benefit. And I know, the local businesses are probably like, well, we don't need any more competition for the jobs. It's tough enough to find somebody now. I think that problem is going to persist until we have a shift. And I think that shift is going to come when we have large-scale development. Because as you have these development opportunities, you're bringing in likely thousands of workers for these facilities. They will also have spousal employment, dependent employment. So you're going to be, the demand is going to be higher, but your supply is going to grow even greater. So I think there's some ripple benefits here that can trickle down to this. Yeah, will there be challenges? Absolutely. But I don't think the labor dynamic we're facing in 2020 to 2023 will be what we need to plan for. I think we have to say, we're not on a 2-year horizon, we're on a 20-year horizon. What's going to be in the future as we move forward? Again, like I said, I think we're all regional. But by including the city of Hermann in my mindset, what that does for me, it strengthens our opportunities for economic activity. It strengthens our opportunity to make the case to the state that we're leveraging transportation assets. Because once I cross the bridge, I get access to two very, very important assets. One, is I get access to Union Pacific, another mainline railroad that has a very strong presence to support economic development and industrial transportation in the state of Missouri. So we get access to UP's main line. That access to the UP main line also has passenger rail available to it. So we're not only looking at how do we move freight, but how can we move people across our community, across our country, across our economies. And having access to UP and Amtrak, to me, were just incredibly vital opportunities. In addition, we have access to the south side of the river. So as we continue to develop opportunities on the river, we are not necessarily just going to be limiting our opportunities for development on the north side. We can actually leverage both. So what are the benefits? Why would you do this? One, I think you can be part of something bigger than just the city of Hermann. You can be part of what we're doing for the mega site. You can be part of what we're doing on the north side of the river. We will attract large industries. I'm confident of that. The demand for these types of facilities are very high. You will experience, if not second-tier, tertiary companies coming in to support those activities as well. You, through the Port Authority, would have access to additional development opportunities and development tools to achieve activities beyond industrial development. And we can talk about what some of those are. A couple of clarifications. I know there was a consultant that came in from Ohio and was talking to a lot of people in the community a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago now. And I think there was information that kind of got out, and it's kind of playing telephone. By the time the message gets to the fifth person, it's a completely different message. And I think there was maybe a little bit of confusion around the taxing power and the tax utilization of the Port Authority. So maybe I'll just start by clarifying that. The power to allocate tax revenues will continue to reside with local jurisdictions, cities and counties. So when you think about things like, oh, what if we do a Chapter 100 tax abatement? That would be the responsibility of the jurisdiction in which that project or that activity is located. What if you do a Chapter 353 redevelopment plan? Same thing. That jurisdictional authority does not rest in the Port Authority, but rather in that local jurisdiction where that project activity will occur. TIFs, tax increment financing, is a term that had been thrown out. TIF is not a tool that the Port Authority that we would access. A TIF is a local, quite honestly, it's a local government tax redistribution program to help you offset development costs, infrastructure, and also help the developer recover some of his investment. But within the Port Authority, instead of a TIF, you would have the opportunity to create port improvement districts. So within the entire geography of what we consider our Port Authority, as projects or needs arise, we would create sub-geographies that could be port improvement districts. Those port improvement districts would then have the capabilities of assessing a real estate tax, a property tax, a sales tax, use tax, something of that nature, just as a city-sponsored transportation development district might have, or a neighborhood improvement district might have, but this would be within that Port Authority. They could use that. The intent of our Port Authority is to partner and collaborate with our local jurisdictions, not usurp their authority. It's just the Port Improvement District is just another tool that can be out there. Yes, a Port Authority can get a grant. There is only one dedicated additional funding stream for Port Authorities that you as a city could access, and that's through the Missouri Department of Transportation. Those are small grants. So it's not like you create this Port Authority, we're going to have access to the government vault and reach in and grab what we want. We're going to have to compete for projects based on the merits of the project itself. But I'm fine, I'm confident with that. I'll take those odds every single day. I think we can do that. The one thing that we can do that reallocates tax revenues is a Port Authority can establish what's called an AIM zone. An AIM zone is for advanced manufacturing. So if we create an AIM zone within the Port Authority, if there's a business that comes in that is classified and qualifies as advanced manufacturing, then the Port Authority can access 50% of the state payroll withholding tax for all new jobs created in advanced manufacturing. So 50% of whatever that state payroll tax obligation would be, instead of remitting it to the Department of Revenue, half of it goes to the Department of Revenue, half of it comes back to the Port Authority for further development and investment in the Port Authority. So as we have infrastructure needs, as we need to build out additional utility, as we want to buy new land, as we need to do more planning, that revenue from the AIM zone, which is something only a Port Authority can access, would be a new tool that's at our disposal. A question that I get all the time is, what about the cost? What's this going to cost me? And I always like to come prepared to give you an answer. So my answer is, I don't know. And I know that's not the answer you're looking for. But let me break out the cost for you a little bit. The primary cost right up front is getting it organized and doing the ongoing administration. Getting it organized, the Montgomery County Commission has actually established the budget and has actually provided the funding for us to go through this process of getting it organized. Getting the articles of incorporation, getting the bylaws put together, getting all the resolutions put in place, and working through the application process to submit it to the Department of Transportation. So the upfront cost of getting it going are already taken care of. The cost of administration is relatively insignificant, and we believe through AIM zone, through time zone, some other tools, that within a matter of years, we will have a sustainable funding source to take care of those ongoing administration expenses. In the meanwhile, those costs are very inexpensive. It's really going to be a cost of insurance for a board of directors, cost of filings, your annual report, nothing of any significance. The other cost related to the Port Authority is projects. And I'm sure if I'm the mayor of Hermann, I'm like, what is it going to cost me to build a water tower near New Florence? And why would I want to pay for that, right? That's a legitimate question. We would look at projects as being geographic specific. So those costs would be applied specifically and only to that project. So in that particular case, let's say the mega site needs 1 million gallons of elevated water at Highway 19 and 70. We would issue revenue bonds on behalf of the Montgomery County Water District to build that tower. The revenues from the sale of that water would pay that off. That's not paid on paid by the entities that are part of the Port Authority. It's going to be very, very project specific. The only thing that's going to be universal to all the geographies would be just the upfront cost, the ongoing administration, which again would be very, very small. Governance. How is a Port Authority governed? It's prescribed by state statute, chapter 68. If you have trouble sleeping tonight, pull it up. It's a fun read. But it basically requires the county commission to appoint a bipartisan board of directors of no less than 7 members. That would be the governance, the board of directors for the Port Authority. Those then would be 3-year terms that would be re-elected and reappointed as their terms expire. Now, in our draft agreements that we developed back in 2022, it gives that power to designate that to the Montgomery County Commission, because that is the geography that we were originally pursuing. If the city of Hermann decides they want to be part of that, then we would actually work that part of the bylaws over to make sure we've got representation from all geographies as part of it. You know, some of the board members that we've identified are literally a stone's throw away, but nonetheless, I recognize the importance of having representation on that, and that would be an issue we will address depending on which direction we go. So what do we need? What is the ask? I said I wasn't going to make an ask. There's not an ask, but the next steps. We have, our plan is to have the application available and completed to submit to MoDOT by the end of April. So what we need between now and then is to understand what is our geography going to be in that application. And that's just as simple as, will the city of Hermann be added to that map or not? If they are, then what we will do is we will have a resolution drafted that says you're electing to participate at that point, and we'll have the attorney draft that, get that to your city attorney, and you guys can act on that or transact that at some point. But what we really just need to know is what direction we want to go. In or out, either way we're gonna advance, but that's really kind of the next action that we need to do. We hope, based on that schedule, that we would have an announcement late fall of 2023, if not sooner. We are actually going to be hosting the Missouri Highway Commission meeting in October. And we teed that up so they would be able to use that opportunity to hopefully announce this designation at that point. So I know I've given a lot of information out in a brief amount of time. I'm sure there's many questions you might have. I will pause at this point and field those and give you as accurate an answer as I possibly can. Yes?
How many port authorities are there in Missouri? Are there any other mega sites or?
There are no mega sites in the state of Missouri. There's a number of port authorities, 13, 14 now. I should have looked that up. 15, thank you. There's a couple that's in progress as we speak that are looking to put together applications as well.
Okay. How small is that administrative cost? Is there like a ballpark figure?
I would say our annual cost for the ongoing cost is really your annual filings and your cost of insurance. If that bill is if that's $20,000, I'd be shocked.
Okay.
So you mentioned the ability to assemble land. How does that happen? What's that process look like?
Sure, and that's a great question, and I should have had that up. In our bylaws and in our discussions with the county, basically port authorities are used in urban areas, rural areas, etc. In a lot of urban areas, they're also used in conjunction with the land clearance and redevelopment authorities. And in those situations, they oftentimes will use the power of eminent domain to acquire property. We are property rights respecters out here. We will not use eminent domain to acquire land. It's really a fair market price. If Citizen Joe says, yeah, I've got 500 acres here and I want $20,000 an acre for it, okay, we will negotiate and agree on a term, and then we can acquire that or acquire the option to do that. Our strategy on economic development, just so you know, is not to tie up our limited financial resources in real estate. Private sector, private investment does really good at buying and holding real estate. We would rather spend our resources on marketing and building infrastructure so we have a quality product to sell. So having the private sector own this land is perfectly fine, as long as I've got an option that says, yeah, we can buy it for this type of a project. But it'd be a market-based transaction. However, to make things a little bit, I think, a little more clear, let's say the county had land that we needed to do something with. But as a public entity, you just can't do something with land. You have to go through this process of disposition of that and put it up for bid, etc. Any political subdivision can give land to the Port Authority. So we can be a receiver of any publicly owned land without having to go through the disposition process that a public entity is restricted to. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
So that's how we would assemble.
When you mention AIM zones
Yeah.
and advanced manufacturing, what scope is that? Like what type of manufacturing is that? I mean, is it technology, or is it some advanced means something else?
It means something. I mean, obviously, if you're manufacturing something in the technology realm, you're using advanced manufacturing because the process is so automated, is so driven by technology. Advanced manufacturing literally could be any industry that's using some level of automation in the process. Certainty. Their entire process from the time they put on the paper till they take off the shingle is untouched by human hands. So they're using automation. That's advanced manufacturing. What would not be advanced manufacturing that you would relate to? New Florence wood products. Pretty much manual. There's not a lot of automation there. Now, if they came in and said, "Hey, we want to, make this a completely robotic facility," then they probably would qualify as advanced manufacturing. Okay. But it doesn't mean they have to be a data center, a call center, a crypto miner. That's really not the industry sector. It's industrial processes that use technology. Okay. And there's a whole list of NAICS codes, North American Industry Classification codes, that show what those are.
So that scope is pretty big.
Yeah.
Along with this Port Authority, I know it's more aimed towards bringing manufacturing industry. Is there any sector, let's say, we join and then we get an influx of people moving in, and of course Herman needs some housing. Is there anything that the Port Authority could do to help with the population growth?
All things are connected. Let me start with that. So if there's anything that we can tie it back to, does it support industrial development or economic development? Yeah, there's a way to make that happen. Do I see port authorities doing a lot of housing and redevelopment in the rural areas? No. In the urban areas, absolutely. I mean, this is a terrible one to point to, but like North St. Louis, all that redevelopment is being done under the auspices of the Port Authority. So yeah, those are allowable activities. You just got to figure out how do you define the project to fit within the parameters of qualified projects. Infrastructure, which is typically the first thing you have to do to even attract housing, can be helped through the Port Authority, whether that be receipt of grants or through issuing bonds, something of that nature can be fine. You could use the land assemblage to promote housing. You know, once land becomes available, you could use the Port Authority to acquire the land and hold that land to control some of that market, so you could have a developer come in and say, okay, we want to build X number of homes at this size. So it's not intended to compete with what the market's doing, but it's a tool to kind of incentivize things that are not organically occurring.
If Herman decided, we said, we want to be a part of this, for this bipartisan board of directors, what representation would Herman have? What do you think?
What do I think? That's good, because I can just share an opinion, because I have no rule making and no authority to speak on this regard. You know, the board members that we've identified, there are two that are literally within a stone's throw of the river. So I think you have a good voice, even if you didn't become part of it. I would think we could easily add a board member that represents Herman, that Herman says put on the council. Okay. Once we understand the extent of the participating jurisdictions, that will ultimately shape what that board of directors look like. For instance, we have communities in northeast Montgomery County that likely will not actively participate in a port authority. They don't see the connection to it. In Middletown, Bellflower. So, you know, right now, the board that we've got kind of identified would cover all parts of the county, but if we've got a huge block over here that's not participating, then we can kind of shift that. So once the application is recognized, the next process will be seating that board of directors. And in the interim, I think we can have these discussions. What's reasonable, what's fair? And how do we do this? Not for your good, but for the people that follow us. Because this thing's going to long outlive me. And so we want to make sure it's structured to do what it needs to do well.
So if the city of Herman would decide to participate, is it just the city of Herman city limits, or does it go beyond? Let's say if you go south just a little bit, there's a lot of flat land up on the prairie there, and a company wanted to come in and manufacturing to assist the big one up there. Would that be part of it, or does it have to be in the city limits?
What I'm suggesting in the initial application, that it just be the city of Herman. Because then we get into, well, if it's beyond the city, we've got to get Gasconade County. Gasconade County is an extremely diverse county. Okay. And Owensville is going to be like, why is Gasconade part of, you know, it's not a multi-county approach.
Okay.
However, we can always amend the geography of the Port Authority. So let's say there's land adjacent that wants to be developed. We can develop it for industrial use without it being in the Port Authority. But if there's an advantage to having it in the Port Authority, if the city annexed it, then all we would need to do is modify our boundary to show that. Or if it's a specific township within the county, we could amend it at that point and bring it in. So all we have to do is file an amendment to our original application. MoDOT would recognize that and we could advance.
Okay, thank you.
So Montgomery City and New Florence, are they the only two towns right now?
No, I would say, we were right at the point of going to pitch it to each cities when we had this, like, hey, let's take a pause. I believe that you will have, when we get all done, obviously Montgomery County, which is the bulk of the geography, New Florence, Montgomery City, Wellsville, Jonesburg, High Hill. The only outliers really are, I think, Bellflower and Middletown. And that's just because they have not really been engaged in discussions to this point.
There's nothing with Warren County?
No, it is just Montgomery. We originally, when we started this idea of a port authority years ago, it was a multi-county between Warren and Montgomery. We believe with what Warren County's got going on, they can have success. They don't necessarily need a port authority. With the mega site approach, bringing in Warren County, we think would just complicate it. Because you've got two very large economies that's trying to do something, and I think that would cause some level of strain. So we made the determination, the county made the determination, let's focus on what we need to do for our mega site in Montgomery County. Now, could we add Warren County down the road? If they wanted to, they could. At this point, I don't see that happening or even being necessary.
No, previous, you mentioned that the jurisdiction is not designated by a black line, city limit signs. With Montgomery County being the leader right now, does that take in, say, Big Springs, McKittrick, Rhineland, so they would be part of what I call the community that serves our school district, a hospital district? That's what I'd like to see the picture to take in the surrounding community.
Sure. And great question. And I probably should, Rhineland would have been one of those communities, should be one of those communities that would be part of it and would adopt a resolution. McKittrick and Big Springs are not political subdivisions of the state. So they're considered unincorporated Warren and Montgomery County, and the county commissioners would represent them. So they would be included geographically. They just don't have to take any action because they're not a political subdivision that would participate. But the village of Rhineland would be one that we would approach and say, you want to be part of this process. John Molzenmeyer is one of the key drivers on this project as well. And so, yeah, we kind of feel like Rhineland's in. We just haven't really had that conversation with them yet. Yeah, David.
What do you think is the role of the river? And the reason I ask is the statute says that in your application you should show that the area designated within the port district shall be or could reasonably be connected to the business of a port. Do we need a port, or do we need a plan for a port in order to?
Great question. We need a plan for a port. And I've had a conversation with Steve Engelman. There's a lot of commodity that can be moved up and down the river. So again, this is one of those issues. Do you go out there and create a public port, or do you figure out a way to use figure out a way to use the port authority to enhance the private sector that's already operating? But yeah, it would require a plan on how do we access that mode of transportation.
And I guess the city of Hermann would be interested in knowing whether this port that hopefully, I guess from your standpoint, increases barge traffic and commercial activity and on is going to be right there, or downriver or upriver, or, where exactly it would be. And, the St. Louis port, under the Port Authority, it says handles 160 barges a day. I know we're not going to be that, but it'd be more barges, we hope. But are they all going to be lined up, right there? Or?
Well, I think that's why it's so important to have your voice at the table. So as these plans are made, you can say what is compatible with your desires for your community versus Montgomery County saying we're going to put it right here on the north side of the river because that's the only jurisdiction we have, or we're going to put it right across from the visitor center so everybody sees it. That's probably not what you want. So coming to the table and being part of that process, you can help shape those plans. That's a big part of your involvement.
Because I guess Montgomery County could do on the north side of the river what Montgomery County wants to do. The county line would technically be in the middle of the river.
Correct. So long as the Corps of Engineers permits it. Well, yeah. That is the 800-pound elephant in the room is the Corps of Engineers. You can't just say we're going to put it here. It has to meet certain qualifiers.
So then if we're going to create a port, hypothetically, on the Hermann River front, then how does that get funded? Does that then become a tax then that actually has to go to a vote of the people?
Great question. No, I think if you did something as aggressive as building a port facility, an operating port facility, you would at that point create a port improvement district, which would then give you a set geography. And then you would have to craft a financing strategy. How do we make that sustainable? Is it a transportation tax? Is it a fuel tax? Is it a sales tax? Property? What is the mechanism necessary? Or can we revenue generate it? Can can we say, you know, we're gonna build this port and we're gonna take so much per ton of commodity that's loaded or offloaded on that facility? There's a lot of ways you can skin it, but it wouldn't be necessarily on the backs of the citizens of Herman. It would be within that sub-region that's the Port Improvement District.
But I think you'd have like a chicken or egg thing. Do you build a port hoping that the businesses come, or you develop your mega site, have the mega developer come, and the development of the port is piggybacked on that development, you know, because they want it presumably.
Correct.
And find a way to roll it into that financing.
Absolutely, that's exactly the plan. I think the only thing I would probably inject in that is early on, we'd have to come up with a plan that says when the need arises.
The state will want to see a plan.
Yeah, here's what we intend to do. Now, we're not gonna build it on a speculative basis. We need to know we have a revenue stream, we have a use that's coming in to support it. So if there's a mega project that needs river access, we figure out what do they need? You know, are they moving bulk commodities? Are they moving containers? Are they moving, ingots? Whatever it is, we'll figure out so we can then design it more appropriate for them. And usually on a project of that size, there's even more opportunities to secure external funding to offset that infrastructure cost.
I'd heard through the grapevine that the state is looking at to help create and increase river traffic of barges. So there could be some grant monies or monies coming towards a port being built and actually return back Herman, because that's how Herman was founded, by river traffic. And the authority everybody could increase.
No pun intended, but a rising tide will lift all boats. And the more we can do to grow our economy, whether that's from large industry or increased commerce on the river, we're all going to benefit. So that's what we're trying to do here. But yeah, I agree. I think the real challenge, I guess I'm being recorded, so I gotta be careful what I say. There's a lot of regulations that govern the use of our waterways. I think there are challenges within some of those regulations that have stymied our reliable use on the river for years. We've got to get past that. We've got to realize that is an incredible asset in our state.
Opens up another door for transportation other than 4-lane on 70.
Yep.
Now we can go by river.
Yep.
And train.
And train. Yeah, and each mode of transportation has their compelling reason to use it. You know, if you need quick to move, reliable, reasonably reliable access to markets, it's trucks on the highways. If you're like, I've got a lot of stuff to move, somewhat time sensitive but not immediate, then you're gonna find a rail line to put that on. You know, and your cost for moving by truck is here, your cost by rail is here. If you're like, you know what, I've got a lot of commodity to move, it needs to move timely but not urgently. You can move it here on the river and here's your cost way down here. So it really, they all have compelling arguments. We just have ignored this lower one for far too long.
With this Port Authority, what is their time frame on actually moving forward with purchasing the land and starting that process?
Sure. The Port Authority and the mega site are on concurrent paths that at some point will combine. We are already advancing the mega site.
Okay.
We've already got a grant to make some roadway improvements. We just submitted a grant to do some due diligence reports. We're working and talking with property owners on who wants to participate, who's willing to allow us to present their properties to large projects. We've actually had a couple of very large projects that we have submitted that corridor to. That would be very, very significant projects. So mega site is advancing, and we have been pushing and pushing and pushing. We just believe the Port Authority needs to come online, so the efforts of the mega site can be put on the Port Authority versus the Economic Development Council, which is not a political subdivision.
Anybody else up here have any questions?
Sorry, one more question. This might be a silly question. Does the Port Authority have to reside on the river?
The Port Authority is an entity, a political subdivision. Right. A port facility would obviously be, they're two different things, but they're conjoined. that,
Yes, I mean, it could, say Herman decides to turn this down, could Montgomery City, could they be the acting political subdivision of the Port Authority? Or is
Montgomery County will be the acting political subdivision behind the Port Authority. And we still have access to a navigable waterway, which is what required. A port has to be on a navigable waterway. So the Luder River wouldn't be a qualifier. It has to be the Missouri or something of that caliber. So Montgomery County would still have access to that from the north side. Their county line goes to the middle. So yeah, we would have access with or without Herman.
So we've talked about all the positive things, all the cons. They do sound amazing, but just playing devil's advocate, is there any con, anything negative for the average citizen?
The average citizen won't even know it exists. It's a layer, it's a political subdivision that's out there. It will not affect them and their pocketbooks at all. It's a transparent layer in the stack of political subdivisions.
So again, if there were a project that the city of Herman wanted to do, and we wanted to work through the Port Authority, and the funding mechanism we thought best was going to be some form of tax, then at that point, the average citizen would have a voice in voting for that or not.
Correct. Yeah, the Port Authority does not have the power to levy a tax, independent of the jurisdiction and voter authorization. That's, yeah.
And if I could just make one more point of clarification with you again, and for everybody else, is that TIF districts are not a part, the Port Authority does not get involved in TIF districts in any way. That is strictly the municipality.
That is a power that's by statute given to that level of municipal county jurisdictions. For what it's worth, I wouldn't want a TIF district to be part of. I'm not a TIF fan. I love port improvement districts because you're taking that resource and investing it into infrastructure, which we can never invest enough in infrastructure. I know it sounds terrible, but our growth is going to be limited by our ability to treat our own crap. And we're not building enough infrastructure to do that. So, a TIF typically will reimburse a developer for putting in infrastructure, but then it goes above and beyond that. I want to take care of that public benefit part, and I think we can do that without the
And
use of
tell us
TIFs.
one more time, what kind of housing projects could possibly qualify for getting some sort of benefit from a Port Authority in our area?
Again, understand the Port Authority, our driver, our focus has been on how do we enable economic and industrial development to occur. Where has it been used for housing is land assemblage, where they go out there and they use resources in the Port Authority to acquire land for redevelopment. I think that is the most plausible way that a Port Authority could advance housing.
Okay.
Now, it could be that they have a financing strategy that says, hey, we need to have some bonds to pay this off. Typically, they would be revenue generated bonds. So you could probably run those bonds through the Port Authority. I don't know why you do that versus a city, but they both have the power to issue bonds. But they're typically, the Port Authority would typically be, outside of a port improvement district, would be limited to revenue bonds, not general
And there would
obligation.
be no special leverage that the Port Authority would have in helping investors get grants or anything for housing projects?
I mean, the Port Authority can make application for grants and receive grants, absolutely. The city can do that as well. So it's just a matter of what entity wants to take that. And maybe it's a project that crosses jurisdictional boundaries. Port Authority is the perfect tool, so you don't have to figure out, well, we're gonna write a grant, but half of it goes here, half of it goes here. You can do the Port Authority and be one entity. That's a single point of contact, which could streamline that. But I don't think I answered what are the cons. And I've thought about that because I knew this question was coming. I think the biggest con is if we allow it in its initiation and its incubation to become political and not practical. We are using this tool, proposing this tool, because it's a very practical tool to use to allow us to accomplish it. We have no political agenda. And if it was like in the formation, it was all about how do we cover up the board seats and responsibilities and becomes very political in nature, that's going to be self-defeating. And it won't work, to be honest. It's going to require trust relationships between all parties involved. And that's only achieved by keeping people at the table, being transparent about our plans, and allowing everybody's voice to be heard so we can make the best decision going forward. It's going to far outlive me, I assure you, and so we just want to make sure it's structured so it's sustainable for the next generation.
You said you have to submit the application to MoDOT, and then they present it to the Highways and Transportation Commission?
Well, it's one and the same, essentially, but the application gets submitted to MoDOT. The Highway Commission is the one that actually approves it based on the staff recommendations from MoDOT.
So Highways and Transportation Commission has the final say. It doesn't
Yep.
go through legislation, it doesn't go anywhere in the Capitol at all.
And they have public hearings, I would think, to accept
Correct.
comments and so forth. So the city of Hermann may not be part of the Port Authority and may not have representatives on the board that's submitting the application to MHTC, but the city of Hermann could be a pretty loud voice at public hearings that they would listen to in deciding whether to approve or not approve the Port Authority, I would think.
Yeah, and in our draft application, we have our ideal representation structure. We'll tweak that once we know who's in, and if we know Herman's in, we're like, our ideal representation would include that. So you would, there's no need to formalize everything and chisel it and grind it until we know we're approved by MHTC.
And is there a port authority in Missouri or somewhere in the United States that is kind of like your model for the Montgomery County?
No, because we do things better than anybody else.
I knew that,
No, there's a lot of ports. I mean, there's one in Jeff City, Cole County.
but, right. I did a little research, of course, but of what's in Missouri, but
We're doing it differently because while we intend to plan for how do we use water, water to support our movement of freight, we're also really emphasizing we have access to all modes of transportation. So it's really a multimodal effort that we're recognizing and tying it to this mega site. Nobody else is tying it to a mega site.
that's what I.
Yeah, we're unique in that. But because of that, I think this application becomes far easier because the mega site has got incredible support from high levels of government.
Anyone else up here? If not, we'll turn over to you all. Have any questions first, and then we'll turn it over to the public here.
No, I mean, I think maybe less of a question than a comment. One of the reasons why we was talking to Steve and looking at this was a big impact of do we support or not support is that this is moving forward with us or without us. And as we look at it and again, it's not something in 1, 2, 3 years that we're going to see something that's impactful to Hermann. But to some of the points made is as we get 5, 10, 15 years down the road, we just want to make sure we have an opportunity to have that voice in it and have an opportunity to influence it in a way that takes us into consideration. And because, like I said, as we know, if we got 1,500 jobs going in at 70 and 19, there's going to be some people that's living in Hermann. It's close enough, and I think we're, again, I'm biased, but we're like the best place to live. And so we, in order for us to be ready for that number of families, and we know that that influx of residents is going to impact our school district, it's going to impact the viability of sustaining a rural hospital system. That's going to bring things into this community that right now we can see marginal growth. But when we started talking about it, and we're talking about, okay, what could be a steroid shot? Is it guaranteed? No. But it has some potential that otherwise we would miss out on. So now even if they build it, we're not in it, we're still going to get some of that, but I think it's important that we have an opportunity to shape that. So that's really my biggest things, and like I said, and because we've already drilled him, the bamboo under the fingernails and everything like that, so we've talked it a lot. So that's where we just felt it was, one as in the chamber, but me just as a citizen, it's important.
Okay.
Question. In the thought process of going after developing a mega site to attract a mega company or developer, what were the reasons to shoot for that as opposed to using the same amount of acreage and instead of attracting one mega developer, attract 10 medium-sized developers, so that if the company goes belly up, it doesn't affect the whole region negatively. You know, you've got more diversification and so forth.
Yeah, a good question. Why mega site? I mean, obviously, the smaller industrial park, they call them premier sites as well. They're in every community and every county, and everyone has their unique and compelling advantage of why a company should locate there. And we can still attract those, and we're still working to attract those, even outside of the mega site. We are just trying to preserve a large tract of land so we can entertain those large projects. We haven't stopped bringing in the 50 jobs, 100 jobs, 500 jobs companies. That's still our primary focus every day. But we felt a mega site was a very unique, a very compelling advantage that this region would have over not just the rest of the state, but really in the Midwest. And that's what we were shooting for. And I'm one of these guys, I like to plan big. I think it was Machiavelli said, small plans do not stir the soul of man. Big plans do. They get people excited, they get people moving towards it. And I'm a dreamer, I'm a big dreamer. And I think this is very real. It just takes some work to put it together.
I like the saying says, if you're setting your goals, you shoot for the moon, because even if you miss, you land among the stars.
I like that too. Yep.
That's part of the same analogy there.
Yep.
And I'm not trying to be a dark cloud or anything, I'm just thinking Fenton and the Chrysler plant, Wentzville and the GM plant, Pacific and the seat plant that made seats for the Chrysler plant and Fenton. You know, that I guess when things were rolling it was good, but there came a tough day, you know, for all those communities and surrounding communities that had the workers that worked there when they took off.
And today it's similar. I mean, what goes into those mega sites is large scale manufacturing. Today that focus is EV. It's either EV, electric vehicle assembly, or electric vehicle component manufacturing. Both of those are enormous projects. And that's what's going to be, that's what's in the market now, that's what's going to be in the market for quite a while. And Chrysler, the old Chrysler plant, that's a nice site, that's a large industrial park, but that's nowhere near a mega site. It's not the land that's necessary. To give you a perspective, has anybody driven down through like Mississippi and seen the Nissan plant? I mean, that's what you're talking about, is thousands of acres of manufacturing facilities. So you think about all of those automobile assembly plants that have been put in place. We're going to see a retooling and a wave of new additions as we fully get into electric vehicle components.
How many thousands of acres are you talking? What's your goal?
Our initial goal is 3,000, our ultimate goal is 5. Now that will take generations for us to get that. Land in this part of the country is not readily available. Oftentimes there's a generational shift before land can be acquired, but we have put everything zoned to where as opportunities come up we can embrace those. But yeah, it will take us years to assemble that, but as long as we've got a plan and we know we're moving forward, if I can get 1,500 acres and I've got a company that says I need 1,000 acres, we're going to employ 5,000 people, great, we've got a location. We can grow beyond that over time, but our nucleus to start with is about 3,000.
Okay. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to have a question? Comment?
Steve, how many mega sites are there in the United States, do you know?
Nope, I don't.
Do you have a guess? I mean, 10,
Oh my God.
100, 500?
No. They're predominantly in the southeast and the desert west. And to a point, the southwest. I mean, Texas, Arizona, you kind of get away from the populated areas. You got some very large scale development there. You're not going to see a whole lot in the east of the Mississippi and north of the Mason-Dixon line because there's just not that. The topography doesn't support it. What we have as an advantage, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, selling you a product you've already bought, but what our advantage is at the 19 and 70 corridor, yes, we've got really good land that lays well and there's abundance of it, but within 40 miles, there's 625,000 people in the labor force. They will drive to these jobs. they will move to these jobs. So northern Mississippi or southern Mississippi, yeah, they may have 10,000 acres, but they can't put 1,000 people together in a workforce. So that is going to be our competitive advantage. You're situated between urban areas. You've got two, educational institutions anchoring east and west of the site, north and south of the site. I mean, it's really an ideal location.
Steve, talk a little bit about, you talk about mega site, we're talking about power, infrastructure, utilities.
Yeah.
And I've already asked this question, but why was New Florence such an attractor for this?
I guess I better make sure I answer it the same way then, since you already did. The electric substation, the bulk substation there at Highway 19 and WW is a massive utility. It can support this level of development. Very few places have that abundance of power, and power is essential. And we're talking hundreds of megawatts will be needed for these facilities. I don't know what the city of Hermann sells overall. Do you use 2 megawatts of power? 1? I mean, you have to understand the scale of it. I mean, they draw more than entire towns do. So that was obviously one of the principal drivers, was the availability. Then it's not just a driver, it's a unique driver that we have, is that power. Adjacent to that's the railroad. Adjacent to that's Interstate 70. So you start putting all this together, and it's 1 + 1 is something greater than 2.
Yes,
Yeah.
So I just wanted to clarify something that Tricia asked about housing and how Port Authority may or may not be able to be involved. And Steve, correct me if I'm wrong in this, but it sounds like what you're saying Montgomery County's wanting to do is not necessarily residential focused, but is it accurate to say, is it fair to say that Port Authority and the powers of Port Authority could be used for a residential or a mixed use development if that was the direction it wanted to go? Like, so maybe our focus might be there, whereas Montgomery's might not be. So is that?
Yes, that's fair. I think realistically, practically, the application, I think, would be, what's the Port Authority going to do to support residential housing development? It's going to drive up demand significantly by creating new jobs. It does have a unique tool application that local governments can tap into, but it doesn't necessarily have any more or different powers than the city already has. So in other words, applying for grants, issuing bonds to build infrastructure, the cities can already do that. The Port Authority could facilitate that, but that tool is already there. But what it's going to do is drive up demand.
Okay.
Which, then you got to figure out if the demand's high, how do we create the supply? Well, then that's when you got to figure out what does that strategy look like, and how do we, and can we use the Port Authority to achieve that strategy? Is there something that the local government is missing that the Port Authority can augment?
Okay.
anyone else?
Do you foresee an ADM or a Bungie, say you do have a port on the river, do you foresee somebody like that coming in to haul grain and move grain for the local middle of Missouri, or have you contacted any of them? Is there interest in that for our local farmers?
No, I've not directly contacted them. I think the things that would support that is, man, you got that camera on, I can't say that. Accessing the port of St. Louis is problematic at times.
Yes.
Not only from a traffic and congestion, but now safety is all becoming an issue. So at some point, there's going to be enough pent-up demand saying, we're not going there with our product, what's my alternatives?
Right.
This would be a likely alternative to where you can bring it almost to the metropolitan area, load it in, and you're not adding a huge amount of river time in the transit.
Yes, sir.
So I wanted to follow up on a question that you asked, Mayor Cox, about what the Port Authority can and maybe can't do inside of the Port Authority zone and then outside of the zone. And so Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, can a Port Authority still be utilized for projects outside of the limits of the Port Authority? It would just then have to maybe enter into some kind of a cooperative agreement with another governmental entities. So for example, in the example that was brought up about possibly building just south of the city limits of Hermann where there might be more buildable land, in theory, a Port Authority could be used as long as Port Authority cooperated with maybe Cascade County or is that accurate or is that?
Yeah, and I think there's really two elements there. One, the Port Authority jurisdiction or the line can be moved over time to accommodate or embrace more properties. Or two, the Port Authority does have the right to enter into intergovernmental agreements with other partners.
Okay.
So, yes, there's a way. What is the best way? I'm not sure, I'll be honest.
Would this Port Authority be willing to help with some river structure on this side for tourism and stuff like that? Or would it benefit anything on the river on this side?
I do see it as a potential tool to aid in riverfront development, redevelopment, yes. What does that look like? Kind of, I don't know, depends on what you need. But is it, do we bring, recreational traffic on the south and industrial traffic on the
Right.
north? Do we just do beautification? Yeah, I do believe those are likely project components.
Anyone else?
Can I just ask how our school feels about it?
So we have not actually, board doesn't have an opinion on this at this time. However, I will tell you this, just anecdotally, we were close to 150 students less than we were in 2017-18. Number one, and number one thing that I hear, again, anecdotally from people who would like to do this community is utilities, the availability of internet, the availability of portable utilities within the community as opposed to outside the community, and available housing. Infrastructure and things like that, I think you're 100% right. You can buy all the cars you want, but if you don't have a road to put them on, it's not going to be very effective. As a citizen, I'm very excited, but I would only be speaking as a citizen. We have a board meeting early March, and we'd like to come before long.
Thank you. Anyone else? If not, any more questions from up here? Okay, I want to thank everybody for coming, and thank you, sir, for the presentation, and have a good evening.
So maybe should we just say that you guys will take it up with further discussion at the next meeting? And
Yes.
then if
Yes,
you
I'm sorry.
want to move forward with that, our city attorney will move forward with the resolution? Dave?
Next meeting is in Monday night.
No.
Well, let you guys have a timeline. You want to submit?
I would like a direction. I don't need a resolution yet. If you're in, we'll just proceed. We're working together. If you say, hey, we're in it, then we're going to start working the application to include you, and we'll catch up with the resolution prior to some submission in late April. That gives you time to review that.
And what is the resolution? It's just, we resolve that we're going to be partners with Montgomery County in this. The document that says how many board members there's going to be and how many from south side and how many from north, that's got to be determined before that resolution, I would think.
Well, I think what I would probably put in the resolution, you're the attorney, I'm not correct. I would probably just make the resolution as simple as is the city of Hermann would be willing to participate in the application process. Because the bylaws, we won't finalize until we know we got MHTC approval. Otherwise, it's worth nothing. But
how would Hermann know that it wants to cooperate and be all gung-ho in the application process until it knows whether it's going to have 1 out of 13 board members or 6 out of 13 board members?
Good question. Yep.
To that answer, that could be changed down the road. Right now, you're just wanting a nod, yes, we're interested, or no, we're not. And then we can revamp that based upon geographical areas or investments. Hermann shall have 2 representatives. Montgomery County will have 5, because I think be a total of 7, you said. So that can come,
At least so.
At least that, so. I think it would be more if the city's like, thanks, but no thanks, we're gonna pass, we'll just proceed. If you're like, yeah, we want to participate, we'll transition, and then we will figure out those details. What is the right level of representation? How do we structure that? Because during that process, during that time, we will have had the same discussion with the other communities in the geography.
So, Mr. Mayor, then, do you agree then at our meeting Monday night, you all can have another discussion about this, and at that time come to basically a consensus about moving forward or not? And then we can notify Steve, and then at that point, if you decide to move forward, then at the subsequent meeting in March, we can do a resolution.
Very good. If there's no other business, I have a motion to adjourn. Motion made, second.
second.
All in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned. Again, thank you everyone for coming.